I was assaulted, my life was ruined by my sister and fiance, and then I discovered my entire family knew the truth and chose to cover up a felony, so I ghosted them and got my revenge. I remember being 21, completely swept up in the dream of my life when my fiance proposed. Justin was truly everything a girl could want, kind, supportive, and he was even close with my whole family. The difference between Justin and everyone else became clear when my own mother criticized my weight gain, cruelly suggesting that Justin would eventually leave me. He stood up for me immediately, telling her off and declaring, "I love her for who she is." My sister, Nikki, was a different story. She was cold, distant, and only seemed to open up around Justin. She affectionately called him her brother and often credited him with helping her through her struggle with drug addiction. I loved her because she was my sister, family, but honestly, we weren't close at all. 6 months into our engagement, something shifted. Nikki completely surprised me by reaching out and suggesting, "Let's go clubbing. I feel bad we're so distant." I was touched by the gesture, hopeful this was the beginning of a real relationship between us. The night started beautifully. We were laughing, drinking, dancing, and I was genuinely having fun with my sister. But the mood changed when Nikki spotted a guy across the room. "I want to climb him like a tree," she announced, her eyes locked on him. She went over to talk to him, but returned minutes later, looking sour and dejected. "What happened?" I asked, confused by her sudden downturn. She scoffed, "He didn't want my number. He wanted yours." I immediately brushed it off. "Forget him. Plenty of guys would kill to be with you," I reassured her. Nikki then said she needed to use the restroom, and then we could leave, an hour passed. I continued drinking the cocktails, trying to remain patient while waiting for her. Soon, a strange sensation started washing over me. I began feeling dizzy and incredibly lightheaded. I figured Nikki must have left without me, so I decided to call a cab and go home. Stumbling outside the club into the cool night air, I bumped right into Nikki's friend, James. They had briefly dated in the past. "Need help to your car?" he asked, sounding concerned. "Getting a cab," I mumbled, my head swimming. "Me too, let's share," he suggested. In the cab, the dizziness intensified as I fumbled around trying to find my phone. Everything was spinning, then a sudden, terrifying blackness engulfed me. I woke up hours later on a hard, uncomfortable sofa. My head was pounding with a sickening intensity. I was in James's place. I spotted my dead phone lying innocently on a table nearby. "You passed out," he explained casually. "Didn't know your address, so brought you here. You slept on the sofa." "I need to go," I said, trying to push past the confusion and the ache in my body. "Justin will be worried." When I finally got home, the air was thick with tension. My parents, Nikki, Justin, and even his parents were all standing in the living room. The sight of them all together felt immediately ominous. "How could you do this?" Justin screamed, his voice laced with pure betrayal. "How could you cheat?" he demanded. "What?" I stammered, completely bewildered. "My phone died," I offered as an explanation for my silence. Nikki immediately cut in, her voice sharp and righteous. "You lying, after everything he's done for you." She showed me photos on her phone. There I was, leaving the club with James, his hand resting on my back. I was so drunk and lightheaded, I hadn't even noticed his touch. "Call James," I pleaded, sure he would clear my name. "He'll confirm nothing happened." She made the call, putting it on speaker. James's voice, sickeningly calm, echoed in the room. She begged me to take her home. He went on to make an even more horrifying claim. "We slept together multiple times." The world turned red. I instantly knew, Nikki set this up. She's lying. Justin just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment hardening his face, and then he left the room. His mother was openly crying. Then my own mother walked up to me and slapped me across the face. "Get out," she hissed. I stumbled out of the house and went to a friend's place, frantically calling Justin repeatedly, but there was no answer. The next day, my mother texted me, confirming I was being kicked out. She called me horrible names and threw all my belongings onto the front lawn. I was homeless, alone, and completely destroyed. No one in my family would take me in. They had all chosen Justin's side over mine. My betrayal felt absolute. I tried one last time to reconcile at Christmas, driving over to my old house and knocking on the door. No answer. My friend called a moment later with the crushing news. She'd seen Facebook photos, my entire family, Justin, and his parents, all celebrating Christmas together in another state, smiling. They had intentionally left me behind. I cried for days, the grief and anger of physical weight in my chest, and then I blocked them all. I returned my engagement ring to an empty mailbox. A friend knew someone hours away who was hiring for a restaurant job and offered a cheap apartment above it. I took the chance and moved, starting my life completely over. I worked grueling 10-hour days and lived in that tiny apartment, but I was saving money. 2 years of hard work and silence passed. I was eventually promoted to assistant manager and moved into a nice condo. I had built a new life. Then there was a knock on my door. It was Justin. All the old feelings, the love, the comfort, the shattered dreams came rushing back, making me want to run and jump into his arms. But then, the memory of the agonizing pain and abandonment returned, and I remembered his betrayal. "Let me explain," he pleaded. He told me that Nikki had finally confessed everything. She had gotten married and, at her own wedding, admitted that she lied about the whole thing. She claimed she had fallen in love and realized the magnitude of what she had done to us. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice flat. "Your friend told me," he said. "Your family's been trying to reach you." "I need time," I said, a wall going up between us. He left, and I was an emotional wreck. 3 days later, there was another knock. This time, it was Nikki. "Please, just 5 minutes," she begged. Against my better judgment, I let her in. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I was jealous. Justin always talked about you, about how perfect you were. I wanted him to see you differently. You destroyed my life because you were jealous," I stated, the anger rising. She flinched. "There's more," she whispered. "That night, James didn't just lie for me." "What do you mean?" I asked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "He did things while you were unconscious," she confessed, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't know he would. I just wanted Justin to think you cheated." "But James, he took it further." My blood turned to ice in my veins. "Are you saying he—" "I have the recording," she cut in, her voice trembling. "He bragged about it to his friends, recorded himself with you unconscious." She handed me a flash drive. I couldn't let him keep it. "You knew," I gasped, the full horror washing over me. "For 2 years, you knew he assaulted me." "I was scared," she said, her voice thin. "If I told the truth, I'd have to admit I drugged you." "You drugged me," I screamed, the betrayal fresh and suffocating. "Just to make you compliant for the photos," she insisted. "I didn't think James would—" I didn't let her finish. I slapped her hard across the face. "Get out," I commanded. As she stood to leave, she turned back. "There's one more thing. The reason I finally confessed." "What?" I demanded, utterly exhausted. "I'm sick, terminal, 3 months, maybe less. I couldn't die without making this right." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want forgiveness because you're dying." "No, I want justice," she corrected, her voice resolute. "James has done this to other girls. I have evidence, names, dates, recordings, but I need you to come forward first. You want me to relive trauma you caused, just to clear your conscience before you die." I shot back. "He's getting married next month to a 19-year-old girl," she said, ignoring my question. She turned to leave, then delivered the final, most crushing blow. "There's something else about Justin you should know." "What?" "He knew within a week that you were telling the truth." My world tilted. She explained that James's roommate, Wallace, told Justin that nothing happened. I had been passed out on the couch all night. Justin chose to believe the lie anyway, she concluded. He said it was easier than admitting he was wrong. My legs gave out from under me. He knew. "Your mom knew, too," Nikki added, her eyes heavy with the weight of her confession. "They all did," the roommate told everyone at a family dinner. They decided to maintain the lie rather than apologize. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered. "Because James kept videos of all his victims," she said. "And last week, he posted one online of you. Your face is blurred, but Justin recognized the dress. He's not here to apologize. He's here because he's afraid you'll find out and sue them all." She left the flash drive sitting on my kitchen table. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. His fiancé's name is Julianne," she said before disappearing. "She's my husband's little sister." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the small, dark flash drive Nikki had left. My hand repeatedly reached for it, then quickly pulled back, as if the plastic casing might burn my skin. It was small enough to fit in my palm, yet it felt impossibly heavy, a monumental weight I'd never carried before. The horrifying thought, James recorded himself assaulting me while I was unconscious, made my stomach convulse over and over, until I had to rush to the bathroom and dry heave into the toilet. All I could think about was Julian, just 19 years old, about to marry a monster who secretly collected videos of the women he had drugged and raped. Every time the thought of throwing the drive away of pretending Nikki had never shown up crept into my mind, I saw Julian's face, young, trusting, and completely oblivious to James's true nature. Hours bled into one another as I sat there, paralyzed by the enormity of the situation. The sun set outside my window, plunging my apartment into darkness. Finally, at 11:47 p.m., I picked up my phone and called Violet, my friend. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. I told her I needed her to come over right now, that something truly awful had happened. She didn't ask a single question, just promised to be there in 20 minutes, and said she was bringing her mother, Nadine. They arrived at 12:15 a.m. Violet was still in her pajama pants, and Nadine was carrying a thermos of tea. The moment they walked through my door, I broke down, ugly sobbing that made my whole body shake uncontrollably. Nadine gently guided me to the couch. Violet sat on my other side, and I told them everything. I recounted Justin's sudden reappearance, followed by Nikki's devastating confession about drugging me, James assaulting me while I was unconscious, and the flash drive full of evidence and the names of other victims. I told them the worst part, that Justin knew the truth within a week and chose to maintain the lie because it was easier than admitting he was wrong. Nadine held my hand throughout my confession, her grip steady and warm, grounding me in reality. Violet silently kept passing me tissues, only speaking to ask a clarifying question when my distraught state made me incoherent. When I finally finished, the three of us sat in a long, heavy silence. Finally, Nadine spoke. Her voice was firm but gentle. She said I absolutely needed to go to the police with the flash drive, that James could not be allowed to hurt anyone else. Violet agreed, but suggested I take a few days first to process the trauma, assuring me I didn't have to rush. Then I told them about Julian and the wedding looming in 3 weeks. Nadine's face hardened immediately. Then we definitely can't wait, she stated with conviction. We stayed up until almost 4 in the morning, drinking tea and meticulously talking through my next steps. Violet made me promise to call in sick to work the next day so I could rest and recover. Nadine, who was also my boss, immediately offered to personally cover my shifts, telling me not to worry about anything except taking care of myself. They both hugged me tightly before they left. I locked the door behind them, feeling a tiny sliver less alone than I had just hours earlier. The next morning arrived far too quickly. I had barely slept, spending the night lying in bed, staring at my ceiling, and replaying every single word Nikki had spoken. My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. For my usual shift, out of pure, ingrained habit, I got up, showered, and put on my work clothes. My body moved on autopilot, while my mind remained utterly stuck on the flash drive sitting on my kitchen table. I drove to the restaurant and walked in through the back entrance, just like every other morning. The kitchen was already hot from the breakfast prep, and the familiar smell of coffee and bacon usually brought me a comforting sense of normalcy. Today, it only made me nauseous. I tied on my apron and mechanically started working the grill, flipping pancakes and frying eggs as the morning rush began to swell. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped a plate full of food. Then, in a moment of utter distraction, I reached for a hot pan handle without a towel and burned my palm on the searing metal. I jerked back from the pain, accidentally knocking over a huge container of pancake batter that splattered all over the floor. Nadine appeared beside me within seconds. She gently took the spatula from my hand and told Hope, another coworker, to take over the grill. Then she firmly guided me to her back office and shut the door behind us. I immediately started apologizing, a torrent of desperate excuses, but she cut me off. She told me I was taking the rest of the week off with full pay, and she wouldn't tolerate any arguments. I tried to protest, claiming I couldn't abandon my shifts during a busy week. She looked at me with her steady brown eyes and said that my mental health was far more important than any breakfast rush, adding that if I didn't go home right then, she would physically carry me to my car. I left through the back door and sat in my car in the parking lot for a full 10 minutes, crying again, but these were tears of gratitude. I couldn't believe how incredibly lucky I was to have people like Nadine and Violet in my life. Wednesday afternoon arrived after 2 agonizing days of pacing around my apartment, completely unable to focus on anything except the silent flash drive. I must have picked it up and set it down dozens of times. I would sit down at my laptop and move the mouse toward the USB port, only to chicken out at the last second and close the computer. The thought of seeing myself on that video made my skin crawl with revulsion. Yet, not knowing exactly what James had done felt almost worse, leaving a terrifying void of uncertainty. Finally, around 3 p.m., I couldn't stand the suspense and paralysis anymore. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop before I could change my mind again. The folder structure immediately appeared on my screen, neat and horrifyingly organized, as if James were curating some kind of sick, macabre collection. There were 12 folders in total. Each one was labeled only with a girl's first name and a date. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely control the mouse as I scrolled down the list. Sarah, 2019. Michelle, 2020. Amanda, 2021. The date stretched back 5 years in a clear, sickening pattern of abuse. I found my own name near the bottom. The date matched the night 2 years ago when Nikki had drugged me and James had taken me to his apartment. I clicked on my folder, and a single video file appeared. My cursor hovered over it for what felt like endless hours but was probably only seconds. Then, with a sudden surge of self-preservation, I closed the folder without playing the video. I knew, deep down, that I couldn't watch it. Just knowing it existed was traumatic enough. But I forced myself to look at the thumbnail image. It was enough to confirm Nikki had been telling the truth. The image showed me unconscious on a couch. That was all I needed to see before I slammed the window shut and ran to the bathroom to throw up once more. After washing my face and brushing my teeth to clear the metallic taste of bile, I returned to my laptop. This time, I opened the other folders one by one. I didn't watch the videos, but I checked the file names and the dates. 11 other girls. 11 other women James had drugged, assaulted, and recorded, treating us like we were some kind of trophy collection. Some folders contained multiple files, meaning he had targeted the same girl more than once. I sat back from my computer, feeling an overwhelming, bone-deep cold, despite the warmth of my apartment. James had been doing this for at least 5 years, likely longer. How many other victims were out there that Nikki didn't even know about? How many girls had woken up confused and violated, never knowing the true extent of what had happened to them? I thought once again of Julianne, young and excited about her wedding, completely unaware that she was about to marry a serial predator. The flash drive, now in my trembling hand, suddenly felt like the single most important object I'd ever possessed. This was no longer just about me. This was about every single girl James had hurt and every future girl he might hurt if someone didn't finally stop him. The thought fueled a desperate, cold determination. Thursday morning, I woke up early and dressed in actual clothes, not pajamas, for the first time in 3 days. I put the flash drive deep inside my purse and drove straight to the police station before I could talk myself out of it. The building was old, red brick, with a parking lot out front, and I sat in my car for 5 long minutes, gathering every ounce of courage I possessed to go inside. Finally, I forced myself out and walked through the front doors, into a brightly lit lobby furnished with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable plastic chairs. A bored-looking officer sat behind a desk near the entrance. I walked up to him and, with a shaky voice, told him I needed to speak with someone about a sexual assault. He barely glanced up from his computer and asked when the assault had occurred. 2 years ago, I said. He sighed heavily and reached for a form, clearly assuming this was going to be another cold case that would go nowhere. Then, I added the crucial piece of information. I have video evidence of multiple assaults by the same person. His entire demeanor changed instantly. He picked up his phone, made a quick call, and then told me to wait while someone came to get me. 5 minutes later, a man in a suit appeared. He introduced himself as Detective Philip Townsend. He looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair and kind, steady eyes that made me feel slightly less likely to throw up. He led me through a confusing maze of hallways to a small, quiet office containing only a desk and 2 chairs. Philip gestured for me to sit down and closed the door firmly. He didn't rush me or act impatient while I struggled to figure out how to begin explaining the complex, awful truth. Instead, he simply waited, quietly and patiently, until I was ready to talk. I started from the very beginning. I recounted that terrible night 2 years ago when my sister drugged me and James assaulted me while I was unconscious. I explained the devastating false cheating accusation and how my entire family had instantly abandoned me based on those lies. Then I told him about Nikki showing up at my apartment with her deathbed confession and the flash drive containing the evidence. Philip took notes diligently the entire time, never interrupting me once, just occasionally nodding to assure me he was listening. When I finished my story, I pulled the flash drive from my purse and carefully placed it on his desk. He picked it up with extreme care, holding it as if it were something immensely valuable or fragile. He told me this was extremely important evidence and asked if I was all right with him looking at the contents. I nodded my consent, and he plugged it into his computer. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the wall, while he clicked through the folders, trying desperately not to think about what he was seeing. Philip finally looked up from his screen, his expression grave and serious. He explained that because I was unconscious during the assault and had been drugged without my knowledge, this was a serious felony case. The fact that James had recorded it only made the legal implications worse. He confirmed that the other videos on the flash drive could help them establish a pattern of behavior that would significantly strengthen the case. But identifying and contacting all the other victims would take time, likely weeks, perhaps even months. He asked if I knew any of the other girls' full names or had any way to contact them. I shook my head, repeating that the folders only had first names and dates. Philip nodded and said they would start by trying to match the dates on the folders to missing persons reports or assault reports from those specific time periods. He asked detailed questions about James, getting his full name, his last known address, and any other information I could provide. I made sure to tell him about the impending wedding to Julian in less than 3 weeks. Philip's jaw visibly tightened, and he promised they would do absolutely everything possible to build a case before that date. He took down my contact information and said someone from the prosecutor's office would be in touch soon. Then he walked me back to the lobby, shook my hand, and thanked me profusely for coming forward. He said that what I was doing took real courage and could prevent James from hurting anyone else. I walked out of the police station feeling incredibly strange and hollow. It was as if I had been carrying an unbearable, crushing weight for 2 years and had just, suddenly, set it down. My legs felt wobbly and my head was spinning, but this time, it was a different, less sickening kind of dizziness. Violet was waiting exactly where I had asked her to be, in the parking lot. She took one look at my face and immediately pulled me into a fierce hug without saying a word. We got into her car and she drove us to a small, quiet coffee shop a few blocks away. She ordered us both drinks, and we sat at a corner table for over an hour. I stared numbly at my latte, trying to process the enormity of what I had just done. Violet didn't push me to talk. She didn't try to offer empty platitudes like everything will be okay. She simply sat across from me, letting me exist in the silence, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand in a gesture of solid support. Finally, I looked up at her, a profound sense of disbelief washing over me. "I can't believe I actually did it," I whispered. That I walked into a police station and reported what James did to me. She smiled softly and said she was proud of me, that it took real strength to face something that traumatic. I started crying again. These weren't the sad, grief-stricken tears of the past few days, but something more complex, relief mixed with lingering pain, something I didn't have words for. Violet patiently passed me napkins and waited while I pulled myself together. Eventually, we left the coffee shop, and she drove me home, making me promise to call her if I needed anything at all. That evening, I was making myself dinner when there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Justin standing in the hallway. My first panicked instinct was to pretend I wasn't home to hide from the confrontation. But then, a surge of hot, sharp anger flooded through me. I yanked the door open and stood there, staring him down. He looked deeply uncomfortable and started to say something, but I cut him off. "Get inside," I commanded. "We are going to talk about why you kept lying when you knew the truth." He followed me into my apartment, and I shut the door firmly behind him. This time, I felt no sadness, no confusion, and absolutely no hope for reconciliation. I was purely furious, and I wanted answers. I was not going to let him leave until he explained himself completely. Justin began pacing across my small living room, finally stopping by the window. He turned back to face me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His voice was quiet when he finally started talking, barely a whisper. He confessed that Wallace, James's roommate, had told him the truth about that night less than a week after everything happened. Wallace had pulled him aside at a family dinner. He explained that I'd been passed out on the couch the entire night, and James had been alone in his own room. Wallace said he felt sick with guilt about lying on the speakerphone call, but James had threatened him into compliance. Justin stood there, looking miserably at the floor as he admitted all of this. He said that by that point, he had already publicly screamed at me in front of both our families. His parents had cried, and my mother had thrown me out. Everyone had chosen sides and made their positions clear. He felt trapped by his own cruel actions, believing it would be easier to just keep going with the lie than admit he'd been cruel and wrong. The words tumbled out of him as if he were confessing to a minor mistake, not the total destruction of my entire life. I felt my hands begin to shake again, but this time it was from controlled rage. "Are you here because you actually feel bad?" I asked, my voice dangerously even, "or because you're scared about legal problems now that the video is online?" His face changed completely when I said that. The fake, rehearsed sadness vanished, and I could see the cold, calculated fear behind his eyes. He started to say something about how he'd always cared about me, but I cut him off sharply. "Get out of my apartment," I said. My voice was calm and steady, in a way that surprised both of us. He opened his mouth to argue, but I walked straight to the door and held it open, unwavering. He left without another word. I locked the door behind him and stood there for a long time, just breathing and feeling an immense, powerful emptiness. Philip called me early the next morning while I was getting ready for work. His voice sounded tired, but there was a determined edge to it. He told me they had gone through all the files on the flash drive and had identified 3 other victims so far. They were still working diligently on finding contact information for the rest. He asked if I would be willing to speak with a victim advocate who could help me understand the complex legal process and connect me with other survivors. I said yes immediately, before I could overthink it. He gave me the name and number for someone at the local crisis center, Anna Kirk. He assured me she was excellent at her job and wouldn't push me to do anything I wasn't ready for. I wrote down the information on a napkin and stared at it for the rest of the morning. I met Anna at the crisis center on Monday afternoon. The building was small, painted a soft blue color that was presumably intended to be calming. She met me in the lobby and led me back to a quiet office with comfortable chairs. Anna looked to be in her 40s, with short dark hair and glasses. She didn't look at me with pity, nor did she attempt to tell me everything would magically be okay. Instead, she simply asked what I needed to know. I told her honestly that I didn't know what to expect from any of this process. She explained how the investigation would likely proceed, police interviews, evidence collection, and possible court appearances if charges were officially filed. She also talked about how to handle the intrusive, difficult thoughts that would inevitably surface about the assault thoughts I had likely suppressed until now. She gave me papers detailing information about trauma therapy and local support groups. Her voice remained even and professional throughout our meeting, not cold, but deeply honest about the difficult road ahead. Near the end of our session, I brought up Julian. Anna's expression shifted slightly when I mentioned the wedding timeline. She explained that directly warning someone in a case like this could be tricky. It might interfere with the police investigation if James became suspicious, destroyed crucial evidence, or intimidated other victims. However, she also said she understood completely why I was so worried about this girl marrying him in less than 3 weeks. She suggested we talk to the prosecutor's office about the best way to handle it. Perhaps there was an approach that could protect Julian without compromising the entire case. I left the crisis center feeling a complicated mix of better and worse than when I had arrived. The next few days were strange and disconnected. I went to work and did my job, but my brain was relentlessly fixated on Julian. 2.5 weeks until she married James. 2.5 weeks until her wedding night. The countdown echoed in my mind. Violet and Hope, sensing my distraction, came over on Tuesday night with ice cream and made me watch movies with them. Hope chose a comedy that was supposed to be funny, but I couldn't focus on it at all. Violet kept squeezing my hand during the more serious moments, and Anchor trying to pull me back to the present moment. I appreciated their effort immensely, but nothing could stop the relentless counting down in my brain. Philip called again on Wednesday while I was at the restaurant. I stepped outside into the back alley to take the call. He said they had managed to contact 7 victims in total from the videos. Crucially, 4 of them were now willing to come forward with formal statements. His voice grew intense when he spoke about their desperate efforts to arrest James before the wedding. He was pushing hard to compile enough evidence quickly. However, the prosecutor was insistent that everything needed to be perfect to ensure they secured a conviction. Every piece of evidence had to be documented correctly, and every witness statement had to be detailed and consistent. I understood the importance of meticulousness, but it felt like I was watching a countdown timer while everyone else moved in excruciating slow motion. That same afternoon, my phone started buzzing with texts from my mother. I hadn't heard from her since I blocked her 2 years ago, but she had apparently gotten a new number. The messages were furious. She said she'd heard I was making accusations and demanded I stop trying to ruin Justin's reputation. Her words were angry and defensive, completely turning the narrative, as if I were the one who had done something fundamentally wrong. I read through them once, the words stinging with exhausted contempt for the woman who had slapped me and thrown my belongings onto the lawn. She still didn't understand, and probably never would. I blocked the new number without responding. Anna called me the next day and asked if I wanted to meet another survivor. Amy Hopkins had been assaulted by James 3 years prior when they were both attending a different college. Amy was willing to talk to me if I wanted to connect with someone who truly understood this specific experience. I agreed immediately. We met at a coffee shop on Friday afternoon. Amy was younger than me, with red hair pulled back into a ponytail. We sat in a corner booth and talked for 2 hours straight. She described waking up confused and sore, with a complete blank space in her memory from the night before. She later found out from friends that James had taken her home. She recalled the sickening way he acted completely normal and friendly the next time she saw him. She had reported it to campus police, but nothing came of it because she couldn't prove anything. Talking to her felt profoundly different from talking to anyone else. She didn't need me to explain the specific, stomach-turning horror of being violated while you are unconscious. She already knew, intimately. By the end of our coffee meeting, Amy and I had reached a unified decision. We couldn't afford to just sit around and wait for the cumbersome legal system to maybe do something before the wedding. Julian absolutely needed to know who she was about to marry. Amy pulled out her phone, and we searched for Julian on social media. We found her easily through Nikki's husband's public profile. She had photos of herself and James looking happy, pictures of wedding planning. Her account was completely public, so we could see everything. Amy and I worked together, carefully drafting a message. We kept it simple, factual, and devoid of emotion. We explained that James had a history of assaulting women while they were unconscious. We stated clearly that we had evidence and were actively working with the police. We ended by telling her she deserved to know the truth before making this life-altering decision. We sent the message from both of our accounts, ensuring she would see it wasn't just one person making the accusation. Then we waited, nerves taut, to see if she would believe us, or if James had already convinced her that women like us were simply jealous liars trying to sabotage his happiness. My phone buzzed less than an hour after we hit send. Julian had responded. I opened the message with shaking hands and read her words twice before the devastating meaning sank in. She called us jealous liars trying to ruin her happiness. She claimed James had already warned her about crazy exes who might try to sabotage their wedding. She wrote that she was blocking both of us immediately and that we should be ashamed of ourselves. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Amy gently took my phone and read the message herself, then tossed it onto the couch between us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I wanted to scream, cry, or throw something across the room, but mostly, I just felt a profound, aching hollow. We had tried to warn her, and she had utterly refused to listen. Now, she was going to marry a predator in less than 3 weeks. Amy finally broke the silence by suggesting we call Anna. I nodded, because I truly didn't know what else to do. Anna answered on the second ring and listened patiently while I explained what had just happened. Her voice remained calm and steady as she reminded me that abuse victims often instinctively defend their abusers at first. She said we had successfully planted a seed of doubt in Julian's mind, even if she wouldn't admit it right now. The information was there, and she couldn't completely unlearn it. Amy spoke up, suggesting we contact Julian's parents instead. We could send them the information along with links to relevant news articles about similar cases. Anna thought this was a brilliant idea and offered to help us compile everything into a clear, professional document that parents would take seriously. We spent the next hour putting together a folder with victim statements, news articles about college assault cases, and a meticulously detailed timeline of James's pattern of behavior. Anna even helped us craft a letter explaining the situation without sounding hysterical or vengeful. We found Julian's parents on social media through her profile and sent them everything, using a subject line that simply read, "Urgent information about your daughter's fiancé." Then, we waited again. 2 silent days passed with no response from Julian's parents. I worked double shifts at the restaurant, trying desperately to keep my mind busy. But every time my phone buzzed, I jumped in startled anticipation. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it was spam or a solicitor, but something compelled me to pick up. A man's voice asked if he was speaking to the right person, then introduced himself as Hank, Nikki's husband. My sister's husband, whom I had never met, was calling me completely out of the blue. He said that Nikki had told him everything before she went into hospice care. His voice cracked with emotion as he described the horror of learning what his own wife had done to me, drugging me and setting up the whole false cheating scenario. He kept apologizing profusely, even though none of it was his fault. Then, he told me the real reason he was calling. Julian was his little sister. He desperately wanted to help protect her from James but needed concrete proof he could show his parents. They were traditional people, and he feared they might not believe him without solid evidence. I told him I could absolutely meet him and show him everything we had compiled. He suggested a coffee shop halfway between us, and we agreed to meet on Friday morning. I hung up the phone and sat staring at it for 10 minutes, completely stunned. Nikki had finally told her husband the truth, and now, her deathbed confession might actually save someone from a similar fate. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived on Friday morning. I spotted Hank immediately. He looked nervous and kept checking his phone repeatedly. He stood when I approached and formally shook my hand. We both sat down with our drinks. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder Anna had helped us create. Hank's face went pale as he slowly scrolled through the victim statements and news articles. He paused on one particular photo that showed James at a party with his arm around a girl who looked barely conscious. His hands were visibly shaking when he finally closed the laptop and gently pushed it back toward me. He repeated that his parents were very traditional and might not believe him at first, but he vowed to do whatever it took to stop this wedding. His little sister was only 19 and had her whole life ahead of her, and he couldn't let James ruin it. I told him about the videos on the flash drive, and I watched him go even paler. He asked if the police had the evidence, and I confirmed they were actively investigating the case. He pulled out his phone and announced he was calling his parents right now. He asked me to stay, just in case they wanted to talk to me directly. He dialed the number and put the phone on speaker. His father answered, and Hank immediately launched into a strained explanation about James's predatory history. I could hear his father getting angry and defensive, arguing that they had already paid for the venue and this was just cold feet. Hank's voice grew louder and firmer as he insisted this was far beyond cold feet. This was about protecting Julian from a dangerous predator. He then told his father that I was sitting right there with irrefutable proof. His father immediately demanded to speak with me. I explained everything clearly to Julian's father while Hank watched, describing the assault, the drugging, the terrifying pattern of victims, and the ongoing police investigation. He interrupted several times, asking pointed questions about evidence and timelines. By the end of the call, his voice had completely changed, shifting from angry denial to deep, genuine worrying. He said he needed to discuss this privately with his wife and that they would call Hank back soon. Hank and I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, talking quietly about Nikki. He told me she had been sick for months before she finally confessed everything. He said she had cried every night, overwhelmed by the knowledge of what she had done to me and how she had utterly destroyed my life. He wanted me to know that she genuinely regretted her actions, even though he acknowledged that regret couldn't fix anything. I thanked him for the information, but I made it clear that I wasn't ready to forgive Nikki just because she felt remorse at the very end of her life. He nodded and said he understood completely. His phone rang. It was his father calling back. They had made a decision. They decided to pull all funding for the wedding immediately and demand Julian postpone it until they could properly investigate these horrific allegations. Hank said Julian was already furious, accusing them of trying to sabotage her relationship, but at least the wedding wouldn't happen in 10 days as originally planned. Hank thanked me for meeting him and promised to keep me updated on the situation. I drove home feeling a sense of profound, deep relief. Maybe, just maybe, we had actually stopped something terrible from happening. That evening, Philip called with the news I had been praying for. They had finally compiled enough evidence to arrest James on multiple counts of sexual assault, drugging victims, and illegal recording. He had been picked up that day. The prosecutor felt extremely confident about securing convictions on at least some of the charges, given the undeniable video evidence and the multiple victim testimonies. I thanked him and hung up the phone, then sat on my couch staring into space. James was actually being arrested. After 2 years of him walking around free, acting normal, he was finally facing the consequences of his horrific actions. I immediately called Amy and told her the news. She started crying over the phone, and I realized I was crying too. We stayed on the phone for an hour, just talking through the shock of it all, how surreal it felt, and how we had both subconsciously expected him to somehow get away with it. Anna called me later that night to check in. She reminded me gently that justice does not simply erase trauma, and that I was absolutely allowed to feel complicated emotions about all of this. I told her I felt relieved, but also deeply empty, as if I had been preparing for a massive fight that had suddenly ended before I was truly ready. She assured me that this feeling was normal, and we scheduled a session for the following week to process everything that had happened. 3 days after James's arrest, Hank called again. Nikki had died that morning. He invited me to the funeral and gave me the details about the time and location. I thanked him and said I would think about it. I spent the next 2 days wrestling with the decision of whether I should go. Part of me desperately wanted closure, wanted to see my family one last time, wanted to say a final goodbye to my sister despite all the evil she had done. But a much larger, more painful part of me remembered being completely homeless because of her lies. I remembered that agonizing Christmas when they all celebrated without me. I remembered 2 years of complete abandonment while they all knew the truth. I called Hank back the morning of the funeral and told him simply that I wasn't coming. He said he understood and didn't try to convince me otherwise. I felt a flicker of guilt for about an hour, but then the cold realization set in. I didn't owe Nikki or anyone else my forgiveness. Her deathbed confession didn't magically erase what she had done or make the pain simply disappear. I went to work instead and kept myself busy with the chaotic lunch rush. A week later, I was working the morning shift when my mother showed up. I saw her through the front window, heading purposefully toward the door with a determined, angry look on her face. Before she could even reach the door, Nadine stepped outside and physically blocked the entrance. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could clearly see my mother's face growing red and furious. Nadine stood her ground, her arms crossed firmly, then pulled out her phone as if she were about to call the police. My mother looked toward the window and saw me watching the scene unfold. She started yelling something I couldn't hear, but Nadine immediately moved to block her view and pointed toward the parking lot, clearly telling her to leave. My mother finally left, and Nadine came back inside. She found me in the kitchen and quietly asked if I was okay. I nodded, but tears immediately started running down my face. Nadine pulled me into a fierce, comforting hug and said, "That's what real family does. They protect each other." I cried in the kitchen for 20 minutes while she simply held me. Hope brought me water and tissues without saying a single word, just an expression of quiet support. When I finally stopped crying, Nadine explained that my mother had been demanding to talk to me and making a huge scene. She had told her firmly to leave immediately or she would call the police. Watching someone protect me without a moment of hesitation made something fundamental shift inside my chest. These people who weren't related to me by blood had shown me more genuine love and loyalty in 2 years than my actual family had in my entire life. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. They wanted me to provide a victim impact statement for James's upcoming trial. The woman on the phone explained exactly what it was and how it would be used during the sentencing phase. I agreed immediately, but then spent the next 3 days staring blankly at a blank document on my laptop. Anna offered to help me write it, and we met at her office on Thursday. She asked me questions about how the assault and everything that followed had profoundly affected my life. I started talking and couldn't stop the torrent of pain. I told her about being homeless, losing my entire family, the exhausting 10-hour days in that tiny apartment, the constant nightmares, the crippling trust issues, and how I still flinched involuntarily sometimes when men stood too close. She typed steadily while I talked, meticulously organizing my chaotic words into something coherent and powerful. By the end of the session, we had a 3-page statement that captured everything. Reading it back made me cry, but it also made me feel an incredible sense of power. This was my truth, laid bare, and James would have to hear it in court. I sent the statement to Philip, and he responded the same day, saying it was powerful and would significantly help the case. 2 days later, Anna called again, asking if I would be comfortable meeting Amy and 2 other victims who also wanted to give statements. She explained that they were scared, but seeing my courage made them believe they could do it too. I said yes immediately, because knowing I was not alone in this fight made the immense burden feel less heavy. We met at the crisis center on Saturday morning. all sitting in a circle with Anna. Amy was there, along with a girl named Rebecca, whom James had assaulted during her sophomore year of college, and another woman named Michelle, whom he had targeted at a party 3 years ago. We went around the circle, sharing our raw, painful stories. I watched them cry while talking about waking up confused or finding photos they didn't remember taking. Rebecca said James drugged her drink at a campus event, and she woke up confused in his dorm with no memory of how she got there. Michelle said he offered to walk her home from a party, and she blacked out halfway there, waking up hours later in a strange apartment. After we all shared, Amy suggested we create a group chat to support each other through the inevitable stress of the legal process. We exchanged numbers, and within hours, the chat was buzzing with messages about court dates and therapy recommendations. Having 3 other women who understood the specific, terrible nature of what I went through made me feel less crazy and profoundly less alone. That night, I texted the group, saying I was scared about the prospect of testifying, and instantly got 3 messages back with encouragement and offers to practice together. Over the next few weeks, we met twice more to go over our statements meticulously with Anna and talk through what the cross-examination might be like. 2 months after James was arrested, I was working a dinner shift when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made me open it. The message said it was Julianne, and she was terribly sorry for not believing me before. I stared at the screen for a full minute, trying to decide if I should respond or simply block the number. She sent another message, explaining that she had found James's collection on his laptop after the arrest, and it had made her physically sick. She said she was in therapy now, trying to process how incredibly close she came to marrying someone like that. I put my phone away and finished my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about her sitting alone, trying to deal with this horrific discovery. She was only 19 and had been expertly manipulated by someone she thought she loved and trusted. When I got home that night, I finally responded, saying I appreciated her apology and that I understood completely why she hadn't believed me at first. She wrote back immediately, asking if we could meet for coffee because she had so many desperate questions about how predators operate and how she had possibly missed the signs. I thought about it for 2 days before finally agreeing to meet at a cafe downtown on my next day off. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, and I spotted Julianne sitting in the corner, looking intensely nervous. She stood up the moment she saw me. I could tell she had been crying recently because her eyes were puffy and red. We sat down, and she immediately apologized again, saying she felt incredibly stupid for defending James and attacking me online. I told her firmly that she wasn't stupid at all, that James was a master manipulator, and he had expertly made her think she knew him. She started crying again and told me about finding those folders on his computer, meticulously labeled with girls' names and dates stretching back years. The police had taken the laptop as evidence, but she had seen enough to know he had been doing this the whole time they were dating. She said she kept replaying their relationship in her mind, realizing all the massive red flags she had willfully ignored because she genuinely thought he loved her. I shared my own sickening experience with James, how he had seemed helpful and kind right before he assaulted me. We talked for 3 hours about how predators work to isolate victims and make them doubt their own judgment and sanity. She asked how I was coping, and I told her about therapy and the support group with Amy and the other victims. Her face immediately lit up when I mentioned the group. She asked hesitantly if she could possibly join, even though her assault hadn't happened. I texted Anna right there, asking if Julianne could come to our next meeting, and Anna replied yes immediately. Julianne cried again and thanked me profusely for not hating her after the cruel way she had treated me. I told her I understood she was a victim too, just in a different, manipulative way, and we desperately needed to support each other instead of fighting. For months after James was arrested, the trial date finally arrived. All 5 of us who gave statements showed up at the courthouse on the first day, wearing matching purple ribbons that Anna had given as a quiet symbol of our shared experience. The courtroom was smaller than I had anticipated, and seeing James sitting at the defense table in a crisp suit made my stomach churn with nausea. He looked so normal and clean-cut, nothing at all like the monster I knew he was. The prosecutor was a professional woman in her 40s named Mrs. Ruiz. She met with us before the trial started. She clearly explained the process and sternly warned us that James's lawyer would undoubtedly try to discredit our stories and make us look like we were lying for attention. The first 3 days were dedicated to jury selection and opening statements, and Mrs. Ruiz methodically laid out the evidence, including the videos and the clear pattern of behavior spanning 5 years. James's lawyer countered by arguing that the encounters were all consensual and that we were simply making false accusations for attention and money. Watching James sit there, looking completely innocent while his lawyer called us liars, made me want to physically scream in the courtroom. Amy grabbed my hand during the opening statements, and I squeezed back hard, a silent bond of shared fury. The next week, they called witnesses. The forensic expert who analyzed the videos testified, confirming that the footage clearly showed unconscious victims. Wallace, James's former roommate, reluctantly testified about James bragging about his conquests and acting highly suspicious after the fact. Then it was our terrifying turn to testify. I went first and spent 2 grueling hours on the stand carefully describing what happened that night and how I woke up with a terrifying memory blank. James's lawyer tried aggressively to make it seem like I was merely drunk and had consented, but Mrs. Rees objected every time, and the judge sustained her objections. Amy testified next and broke down crying when describing her assault, her pain visible to everyone. Rebecca and Michelle gave similar, heartbreaking accounts. The last victim was a girl named Sarah, whom James had assaulted just 6 months before his arrest. Watching James try to maintain a facade of sympathy while we all testified made me physically sick. His lawyer relentlessly suggested we were all lying for money or revenge, but the jury looked increasingly disgusted by his desperate tactics. The trial lasted 3 weeks in total, filled with expert witnesses and character testimony. On the final day, Mrs. Rees gave a powerful, compelling closing argument about predators who expertly use drugs and alcohol to assault vulnerable women. The jury deliberated for 2 long days before finally coming back with a verdict. We all held hands in the courtroom, our hearts pounding, when the judge asked the foreman for the verdict. The foreman stood up, his voice clear, and said, "Guilty on 8 counts of sexual assault and illegal recording." James's face instantly went white with shock, and his lawyer immediately started talking about appeals. The judge set the sentencing for 2 weeks later, and we all walked out of the courtroom together, a united front. Sentencing day arrived on a cold morning in late November. We all wore the purple ribbons again and sat together in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. The judge asked if anyone wished to make a victim impact statement before sentencing. All 5 of us stood up and took turns reading our statements. I went last, and my voice shook with emotion as I read about losing my family, being homeless, and spending 2 agonizing years thinking I was crazy. When I finished, the judge nodded and thanked us all for our courage. Then she looked directly at James and stated that his actions showed a clear pattern of predatory behavior and complete lack of remorse. She sentenced him to 12 years in prison with mandatory registration as a sex offender for life. It wasn't as much as I had wanted. I had hoped for 20 years at least, but Mrs. Rees later told us that 12 years was actually more time than most assault cases receive. Amy grabbed my hand when the sentence was read, and we both started crying immediately. The other victims joined us, and we all hugged right there in the courtroom as James was led away in handcuffs. Outside in the hallway, we cried together for another 20 minutes. These were not sad tears, but tears of profound relief mixed with lingering anger that it had taken so long for justice to arrive. And it took us all out to lunch afterwards, and we talked about what came next. The trial was over, but the difficult work of healing was just beginning. 3 days after the sentencing, Justin left me a voicemail. I saw his name pop up on my phone and almost didn't listen to it. The message started with him saying he was glad I got justice and the right thing happened. Then he transitioned into the real purpose of the call. He hoped we could move forward and maybe talk about everything that happened. His voice sounded utterly fake and rehearsed, as if he were reading from a script someone else had written. I deleted the message halfway through and immediately blocked his number. Amy texted me shortly after, asking if I was okay because she knew Justin had been trying to contact me. I told her I was completely done with him and felt nothing but pity for how pathetic he sounded. She sent back a thumbs up emoji and the words "good riddance." That night, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The trial was over, James was finally in prison, and I had a solid support system of people who genuinely cared about me. Justin trying to worm his way back into my life simply showed that he had never changed and never would. I considered responding to finally tell him off, but then I realized he didn't deserve any more of my precious energy. Anna had given me the name of a trauma therapist who specialized in sexual assault cases. I called and made an appointment for the following week. The therapist's name was Dr. Rachel, and her office was in a quiet, unassuming building near the crisis center. Our first session was primarily about discussing my history and setting goals for what I wanted to work on. I told her about the assault, the profound family betrayal, and how I still suffered from terrifying nightmares most nights. She explained that trauma therapy would involve processing the traumatic memories in a safe, controlled way, and learning essential coping strategies to manage my day-to-day life. The sessions were harder than I had expected. Dr. Rachel made me talk about excruciating details I had spent years desperately trying to forget. Some weeks, I left her office feeling completely exhausted and raw, as if someone had brutally scraped out my insides. Other weeks, however, I felt noticeably lighter, as though I had finally put down something impossibly heavy I had been forced to carry. We focused on techniques for managing panic attacks and the constant, intrusive thoughts. Dr. Rachel taught me simple but effective grounding exercises for when I felt overwhelmed and disassociated. After 2 months of weekly sessions, I noticed a significant change. The nightmares were less frequent. I still had bad days where getting through the simplest tasks felt overwhelming and impossible, but I was slowly learning to ride them out instead of spiraling into total despair. The group chat with the other victims helped immensely, as they understood the specific kind of trauma we shared on a visceral level. Slowly, subtly, I started feeling less like a victim forever stuck in the past, and more like a survivor actively healing and moving forward with purpose. 5 months after the trial ended, Violet came to my apartment, looking uncharacteristically nervous. She sat down on my couch and said my father had contacted her, asking if I would consider meeting with him. I felt my chest tighten instantly, and I asked her what exactly he wanted. Violet said he had called her 3 times in the past week, saying he finally realized how completely wrong the family had been and that he desperately wanted to apologize. She made it unequivocally clear that she didn't believe I owed him anything, but she felt she needed to pass along the message. I spent the next 2 weeks thinking about it constantly. Part of me wanted to ignore him completely and maintain my peace, but another, smaller part wanted to hear him admit, in person, the terrible thing they had all done. I talked about it extensively in therapy, and Dr. Rachel strongly advised that I should only meet him if I felt genuinely emotionally ready and could maintain very clear, firm boundaries. After 3 weeks of agonizing internal debate, I told Violet that I would agree to one coffee meeting with her present, and made it crystal clear that I was absolutely not promising reconciliation or forgiveness. Violet called my father back and set up the meeting for the following Saturday at a quiet cafe near my apartment. The morning of the meeting, I almost canceled twice. Violet picked me up, and we drove to the cafe together, with her gently reminding me that I could leave at any point if I felt overwhelmed. My father was already sitting at a table in the back when we arrived. He stood up when he saw me, and I noticed immediately that he had aged significantly in 2 years. His hair was noticeably grayer, and there were new lines etched around his eyes. We sat down, and there was an awkward, painful silence for a minute before he finally started talking. He said he was truly sorry for everything, and he knew that sorry wasn't enough. Then, he started crying actual, genuine tears running down his face while I sat there feeling mostly numb and detached. He confirmed that they all knew the truth within a week. Wallace had told them everything at a family dinner. He said my mother had convinced everyone to maintain the lie rather than admit they had made a horrible, catastrophic mistake. They were simply too proud and too deeply invested in the false narrative they had created about me. Hearing him say it out loud didn't make me feel better, like I had always thought it would. Instead, I felt a fresh wave of anger that it had taken him 2 years and a criminal trial to finally admit the truth to my face. He kept apologizing, saying he understood completely if I never forgave him. Violet sat right next to me the entire time, her hand resting firmly on my arm for support. When my father finally stopped crying, I took a deep, steady breath and told him calmly that I appreciated his apology, but I wasn't ready to have him back in my life. I told him that I might never be ready for that, and he needed to accept it unequivocally. He nodded slowly and said he understood that he had brutally destroyed my trust and couldn't demand that I rebuild it on his timeline. He asked if he could at least know how I was doing sometimes, and I said no. That ship, I told him, had sailed when he chose Justin's convenient lie over his own daughter. Violet squeezed my arm gently, and I stood up to leave. My father started to say something else, but I cut him off firmly and said we were finished. Walking out of that cafe, I felt lighter than I had in months. I had spent 2 long years wondering if my family would ever admit they were wrong, and now I finally had my answer. It didn't change anything that had happened, nor did it magically fix the damage, but at least I finally knew the full, unvarnished truth. 6 months after the trial ended, Nadine called me into her office at the restaurant during the chaotic lunch rush. She closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit down, a familiar action that made my stomach drop with fear that I had messed something up. Instead, she pulled out a folder and slid it across her desk toward me. Inside was a contract for the full manager position, with a salary that made my eyes go wide in shock and excitement. She said I had earned it through sheer hard work and by showing up every single day, even when things were incredibly difficult, and that she now trusted me implicitly to run the entire place. I started crying right there in her office. For the first time in years, I felt like someone believed in me based on what I had actually done, based on my merits, not on who my family was or the terrible things that had happened to me. The raise meant I could finally afford to take some college classes online, something I had completely given up on after my family had kicked me out and I was just trying to survive. Nadine hugged me and told me to go splash some water on my face before the dinner shift started. I floated through the rest of that day, feeling an exhilarating sense that I was finally building something real and permanent for myself. I enrolled in criminal justice courses that fall semester. Working closely with Anna and witnessing the legal system actually work for once made me determined to help other survivors navigate the brutal process. The classes were much harder than I expected, since I hadn't been in a school setting for years. But I stayed up late studying after my restaurant shifts and slowly but surely started getting the hang of it. Violet came over one night while I was reading about victim advocacy programs and told me I was going to be the world's most understanding victim advocate someday. She was probably right. I understood, on a fundamental level, what it felt like to not be believed, to have everyone turn against you, and to feel like the entire system was designed to protect everyone except the person who got hurt. Taking those classes made me feel like I was taking all that deep-seated pain and finally turning it into something that could actually help people, instead of just carrying it around forever as a burden. Our survivor support group kept growing steadily over the next few months until we had 8 women meeting twice a month at the crisis center. Amy and I started running the meetings together because Anna said we had a natural way of making people feel safe enough to share their horrific stories without fear of judgment. It was incredibly powerful sitting in that circle, listening to other women talk about their experiences and realizing we all shared similar feelings of shame, anger, and confusion, even though our specific situations were drastically different. We shared resources for finding trustworthy therapists and lawyers, talked about coping strategies that actually worked, and simply existed in a judgment-free space where nobody ever questioned whether we were telling the truth. Transforming my trauma into something that helped others feel less alone made the whole nightmare feel slightly less pointless. It made me believe that maybe some lasting good could finally come from it after all the darkness. Julianne started coming to our meetings about 3 months after the trial ended, and she quickly became close friends with several of us. She was still deeply processing how incredibly close she had come to marrying someone who would have undoubtedly hurt her eventually. Being around other survivors helped her understand that predators are masters at hiding their true nature. She signed up for self-defense classes and completely changed her major to psychology because she wanted to understand how she had missed all the screaming warning signs with him. Watching her transform her fear into fierce determination felt like the one genuinely good thing that came from this whole terrifying mess. I was incredibly glad she had our group to support her through her complex healing process. A year after Nikki died, Hank sent me photos of his baby daughter, who had been born 2 months earlier. He had named her after his late wife, which I thought was a sweet gesture, even though thinking about Nikki still made my chest feel tight with conflicting emotions. In his message, he said he was already telling his daughter stories about her aunt that focused on the good moments they'd had together. But he promised he would make sure she knew the whole complicated truth when she was old enough to understand that people are complex and not just one thing. I wrote back congratulating him and thanking him for being honest about who Nikki really was, acknowledging both the good and the bad. Pretending she was perfect would have felt like yet another painful lie. Looking at those innocent baby photos made me realize how life just keeps moving forward relentlessly, even after terrible things happen. New people are born who have no idea about all the deep pain that came before them. I woke up one morning and realized, with a jolt of hope, that I had gone almost 2 weeks without having nightmares about the assault. That was the longest stretch since it had happened. When I did have bad dreams now, I could actually use the breathing exercises and grounding techniques my therapist had taught me to calm myself down, instead of spiraling into despair for hours. Healing wasn't a straight, easy line like I had hoped it would be. I still had hard days where simply getting out of bed felt impossible, and everything seemed to remind me of what had happened. But those bad days were gradually getting further apart, separated by more and more good days where I felt almost wonderfully normal. My therapist kept reminding me that trauma changes you permanently, and that healing doesn't mean magically going back to the person you were before. It means learning to live fully and authentically as the stronger person you are now. Violet decided I was ready to start dating again and set me up with her cousin, who was visiting from out of state for a week. I almost canceled 3 times before the actual date because the idea of sitting across from someone new and attempting to act normal made me want to throw up from anxiety. The date itself was predictably awkward, but not terrible. We went to a movie and then got coffee afterwards. He was nice enough, though there was absolutely zero spark between us. But it felt incredibly good to prove to myself that I could sit across from a man without having a full-blown panic attack. That I could successfully make small talk, laugh at a joke, and just be a regular person on a regular date. When he texted asking for a second date, I politely declined, but I was deeply glad that Violet had pushed me to try. The acceptance letter from the social work program arrived on a Tuesday morning before my shift at the restaurant. I opened it standing in my kitchen and had to read it 3 times before I could fully believe what it said. Full scholarship, based entirely on my powerful essay about surviving assault and family abandonment. I started crying happy tears for the first time in years. Actual tears of pure joy, instead of the familiar tears of grief, anger, or deep frustration. Nadine threw me a surprise party that night after we closed the restaurant. There was a cake that said future social worker in purple frosting, and everyone from the support group showed up to celebrate with me. Standing in that room, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me and were truly proud of what I had accomplished, made me realize that I had built a real, uncheckable life here, one that nobody, ever, could take away from me. My mother made one final, desperate attempt to reach out through a long, handwritten letter that my father delivered to the restaurant. I took it home and read it that night. Every single word just made me angrier because she spent 6 pages making pathetic excuses and trying to explain why she had done what she did, without ever actually taking full responsibility. She claimed she had only been protecting the family's reputation, and that Justin had seemed so absolutely certain I had cheated, and she just wanted to keep the peace. Reading her attempt to justify slapping me and throwing me out made my blood boil with righteous fury. I wrote back exactly one sentence, telling her that I had completely moved on with my life and she was no longer a part of it. I mailed it the next day and felt genuinely free for the first time since this whole nightmare had started. It felt like I had finally, permanently closed a door that had been painfully hanging open for years, letting in drafts of trauma and doubt. 2 years after everything had brutally fallen apart, I was successfully finishing my degree while running the restaurant as the full manager and proudly helping to lead a survivor support group that had grown to include dozens of women over time. I still had complicated, heavy feelings about my family and what they had done to me. There were moments where I missed my dad, or wondered what holidays might have been like if none of this had ever happened. But I had built an authentic chosen family with Violet, Nadine, Hope, Amy, and all the other survivors who understood exactly what I had been through without needing endless explanations. We celebrated each other's wins with genuine joy and showed up during the inevitable hard times. And nobody ever made me feel like I had to forgive people who didn't deserve it or pretend to be completely over the trauma that still affected me every single day. My life looked completely different from the naive future I had imagined at 21 when I was planning a wedding. But it was fundamentally mine in a way that old life never truly was. I'm at the restaurant when my phone buzzes with a text from Amy that simply says denied in all caps, followed by 3 celebration emojis. My hands shake with excitement as I read her follow-up message. She explains that James went before the parole board yesterday, and they turned him down flat, explicitly citing his complete lack of genuine remorse and the severe nature of his crimes against multiple women. He won't be eligible to apply again for another 3 years minimum, which means he'll serve at least half his sentence before he can even attempt to get out. I text back immediately, asking if we can do an emergency group meeting tonight to celebrate this major victory. Within an hour, everyone confirms they can make it to Violet's apartment. We order a ridiculous amount of pizza and sit around her living room, passing around Amy's phone to read the official parole board statement. There is something incredibly powerful and validating about seeing our trauma validated in cold, legal language that definitively calls James dangerous and unrepentant. Hope raises her soda can in a toast to justice actually working for once, and we all clink our drinks together, knowing that for at least a few more years, James is exactly where he belongs and can't hurt anyone else. The next week, I'm shopping for groceries. I turn down the cereal aisle and nearly walk straight into Justin's mother, who is reaching for a box of cornflakes. She freezes immediately when she sees me, her hand still extended toward the shelf. I watch her face as she struggles to decide whether to pretend she didn't notice me or actually say something. She chooses to speak, her voice soft and apologetic as she tells me she's been wanting to reach out for months to say how truly sorry she is about everything that happened. I stand there, holding my basket with one hand, and I look at her without any of the searing anger I used to feel, just a tired, final sort of acceptance that some things can never truly be fixed. I tell her as politely as I can manage that I appreciate her wanting to apologize, but that ship sailed a very long time ago. And I need her to respect that I have unequivocally moved on with my life without her or her son in it. Her face crumples a little. She looks like she desperately wants to argue or explain herself, but instead, she just nods slowly and turns back to the cereal shelf. I walk past her to grab my own box of granola and head to the checkout. I feel profoundly proud of myself for standing firm in my boundaries without being cruel and without letting the old pain force me to lash out at her. 3 months later, Julian calls me, sounding happier than I've heard her in years. She's talking so fast that I can barely understand her at first. She tells me she met someone in her therapy group 6 months ago, a guy who has been working through his own devastating family trauma and who genuinely understands everything she went through with James. They've been taking things incredibly slow and honest, and last night, he proposed in the most low-key, authentic way possible, by simply asking her during a quiet walk if she'd want to build a life together. She's calling to ask if I will come to the wedding as an honored guest, not a bridesmaid, because she knows that might be too much emotional pressure, but someone deeply important who she truly wants there to witness this new, honest chapter. I'm genuinely touched that after everything, she wants to share this moment with me. I tell her I would be truly honored to attend. The wedding is small and simple, held in a community garden on a Saturday afternoon with maybe 40 people total. Watching her marry someone who looks at her with genuine, unreserved respect and kindness, someone who knows her whole horrific story and loves her anyway, feels like a final, healing closing of a circle that had started with so much pain and manipulation. At the reception, Julian asks me to give a toast. I stand up in front of the assembled members of our survivor group who came to support her, and I talk about second chances and the power of chosen family. I keep it short because I'm still not great at public speaking, but I say that sometimes the absolute worst things that happen to us lead us, eventually, to the people who will truly help us heal. And that family isn't always the people you are born to, but the ones who actually show up when you need them most. Half the survivor group is there, celebrating with us. These are the women who understand, fundamentally, what it means to painstakingly rebuild your life after someone tries to utterly destroy it. And there's something incredibly beautiful and restorative about seeing Julian start fresh with someone who genuinely deserves her. The whole scene makes the past 2 years of hard work, painful therapy, and legal battles feel profoundly worth it, knowing that at least one good thing came from all that darkness. 2 years after starting my degree, I'm walking across a stage in a cheap, scratchy polyester gown to accept my bachelor's degree in social work. Nadine, Violet, and Hope are in the third row cheering louder than anyone else in the auditorium. I can see Amy and the whole survivor group scattered throughout the audience, holding up signs they made just for me. My father had texted me last week asking if he could attend. After talking it through with my therapist, I told him he could watch from the back, but we would absolutely not be taking family photos together or pretending everything was fine. I spot him standing in the very last row during the ceremony. When I walk past after getting my diploma, he gives me a small, silent nod that I returned before moving on to my real celebration. The celebration afterwards at the restaurant is exactly what I need. I am surrounded by the people who actually showed up for me during the hardest years of my life, who never once asked me to forgive people who didn't deserve it or pretend that my trauma wasn't real. The crisis center calls me 3 weeks after graduation to offer me a position as a victim advocate. It's the very same job Anna does, the job I've been dreaming about since I first met her. I start the following Monday. I spend my first week shadowing Anna as she meets with other assault survivors, helps them carefully file police reports, and explains their complicated legal options in language that actually makes sense to a hurting person. She becomes my official mentor in this new career, teaching me how to perfectly balance deep empathy with firm, necessary boundaries, and how to validate someone's trauma without taking it on as my own personal burden. Working directly with assault survivors and helping them navigate the brutal legal system feels like the most meaningful, essential work I've ever done. It feels like I'm taking everything terrible that happened to me and directly using it to make someone else's terrifying path a little bit less brutal and lonely. Every single time I help a woman file a restraining order, or connect her with a trauma therapist, or just sit with her while she cries about what happened, I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I desperately needed when I was at my absolute lowest point. 3 years after the assault, I'm in a healthy, honest relationship with someone I met through a friend of Violet's. He's someone who knows my whole story and never, ever makes me feel broken or damaged because of it. We are taking things incredibly slow because I still have debilitating trust issues that pop up at weird, unexpected times. There are moments where I panic if he touches me when I'm not expecting it, or I suddenly need space after we've been together for too long. He is endlessly patient with all of it. He never pushes me to move faster than I am ready for. And therapy has taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending I'm completely over it. Healing means learning to live fully despite the trauma. It means building a life where the assault is a part of my history, but not the single thing that defines my entire existence. Some days are still hard, and I still have nightmares occasionally, but they are getting less frequent, and now I have the tools to calm myself down instead of spiraling into darkness. Amy and I spent 6 months meticulously writing an article about our entire experience for a national magazine that focuses on assault survivors and the legal system. We go through dozens of drafts, trying desperately to find the right balance between being completely honest about the trauma and not making it so graphically horrifying that readers can't handle it. We seek a balance between protecting our privacy and being vulnerable enough that other survivors will connect with our painful story. When it finally publishes, the response is overwhelmingly positive in the best possible way. Dozens of women reach out through the magazine, saying our story gave them the courage to report their own assaults or finally leave abusive situations. Knowing that by sharing the absolute worst thing that ever happened to us, we've helped other people feel less alone, makes the vulnerability of putting it all out there feel profoundly worth it. It feels like we've taken something truly terrible and transformed it into something that might actually save someone else's life. I buy my very first house 18 months into my advocacy job. I used the money I saved from the restaurant combined with my new salary to put a down payment on a small, 2-bedroom place with a little backyard. Violet helps me paint every single room in bright, cheerful colors that make me happy. Yellows and blues, and one dramatic accent wall in deep purple that constantly reminds me of the support group and everything we've built together. Having a physical space that is entirely mine, that no one can ever kick me out of or take away, feels like the ultimate reclaiming of my independence after spending those first dramatic months sleeping on friends' couches and in that tiny apartment above the restaurant. I hang photos of my chosen family on every wall, pictures from Julian's beautiful wedding, my graduation, and random nights laughing at the restaurant. They are visual proof that I built something real and good from the desolate ashes of my old life. Looking back at everything that happened, I realize I am genuinely happy now in a profound way I never was before the betrayal. Back when I was planning a wedding to someone who didn't truly love me and trying desperately to please a family that would heartlessly abandon me the second it was convenient for them. I now have meaningful, purposeful work helping survivors navigate their trauma, authentic friendships built on honesty instead of obligation, healthy and rigid boundaries with toxic family members who no longer get to be part of my life, and a strong sense of purpose that came from transforming my trauma into advocacy that might actually help countless other people. The path here was brutal and involved losing everything I thought mattered, watching my sister destroy my life out of pure jealousy and learning that my entire family chose maintaining a lie over admitting they were wrong. I wouldn't wish any of it on anyone, but I am fiercely proud of the strong and compassionate person I have become through surviving it all. Proud of the good life I've meticulously built on my own terms, with people who actually deserve to be in it. I am truly excited about the future in a way I never was when I was 21 and engaged. Because now I know exactly